Good evening again. It's an honor and a privilege to be standing here in front of you. I really appreciate this turnout and interest in in what we're doing. I'll have a microphone later in case you can't hear me, but before we start, I'd like to call on our elder, it's also my uncle, Albert Taylor, to do a prayer. We're going to be covering a lot of information, and we need a prayer so that we can absorb as much of it as possible. So if you have a little bit of a sore brain after, you can blame my uncle.
My friends,
Just trying to help out, is okay?
Yeah, no problem.
in all Dakota ways, whenever we get together, meetings, before meetings or anything like that, we always say a prayer. Ateo kantaka, tiona kagdira hitu ateo kantaka oshira yukio. O kateo kantaka, oichi manidechia ohipi. O kahektakia wasitu skahi honiga makocho down get to sechoka. O makocho wasire. Chixtis ichua che wasikin no kipi. O kateo kantaka ha Ohana o kora ki chi o ya kumta. Se te hichi kunki chi punki ichi tushi. Kaita se toksis hana. Ateo kanska chteit gret hun skawa tako i chomte hana. O yuk senga tako astesti hana to kane oya ki hana. Tako ekti ka ichahda nersikt. Naku ateo kanta ka deitso hengak to ona te heka na ho. Ma kortse ek dan heel hitje architecture hana tuitje hana. A ketu nak se hitje di. Isaka kum hitje hoatse uchakte. Naku tanka ko uchakte. O ka teo kanta ka hana. Hana ni viche. Hon kaka hana chea pide han. Hon kaka hana usvicha kiriga. Och jag äter det är om usvicha kiriga. Woka hana och är kärkok. Och jag äter stituka hana kiriga bitokia. Och hoitse topsek to hi bunka. Tuska och det tappa zopte. Och hana on kan kunst i naate, dan weet ik zeer gewoon een keer. Ik schreef daar met Sam Shahdo, en kost het eigenlijk, maar kost het ja doen. Ook kan hij na hoe het zo'n dag werken, om niet te weten. En dat deed hij ook, toen schouwen de woorden, ik zag het daar zitten. Onzondag, wat ik daar was.
Oh.
I'll say a few words. You know, in a foreign language. What I said was, to have a good meeting, and, so we can all understand each other mutually, and openly. But one of the things I prayed for was, there was a sad incident happening in your country, and I asked God, ask God, our Creator, to take all the children that have left this world, and also the adults that were gone. Then I asked Wakantaka to help the families that were grieving, that are crying today. I asked God to stand by them and wipe their tears, and also I asked God to help the country. There are better ways of doing things than killing each other. With that, I just wanted to say that, what I prayed for. I wanted to explain into the foreign language. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You're safe. there's a group called AIM, and they're American Indian movement. Some people like what they do, others don't, and my uncle can express, it may not have been the right way to do a lot of things, and so what we've done is we've basically gone back to our ways, the ways of the Creator, the laws that were given to us. And this presentation I'm going to show you, there's a lot of information that we have, and I'll explain it when we go through, but there's a hand of God is at work helping us with what we're doing here. In 2007, we had pipelines that were coming through this part of the territory here. This is in Canada, and we have what we call treaty people in Canada. There's a number of treaties, 1 to 11, who basically gave away all of the prairie provinces. And so when these pipelines were going through, there's a lot of concern about these pipelines, and a lot of them, there's a few of them that have blown up in our area. Different pipelines, gas pipelines, and the oil pipelines that have leaked into the groundwater. So these treaty Indians have tried to take Canada to court, and they lose every battle, every court case they lose. And so the younger generation started asking questions. Well, what's in these treaties? Why aren't these treaties helping us? They're supposed to be, a treaty is supposed to be based on peace, friendship, and equality, right? Well, unfortunately, the treaties that they signed with Canada were written in a foreign language, and they didn't know what they were signing. They agreed to share the resources, and what they found out was that what they signed was more or less a surrender agreement. So that's why they lose a lot of their cases. So what the pipelines didn't want was the Dakota people to take them to court. The reason being is that Dakota people don't have a treaty with Canada. We've never signed any surrender agreements on this side of the border either with the United States. The 1868 Fort Laramie Treaty was actually a treaty where the United States sued for peace. And it's the only time that the United States government has ever surrendered. So that's a bit of our, a little bit of history that's happening right now. So the pipelines told our leaders, our Dakota leaders, and we're broken up into nine reserves that have never signed treaty with Canada. There are other Lakota and Nakota reserves that have signed adhesions to treaties over the years, but the Dakota people have never signed any treaties with Canada. So what they did was they said, we're going to go on your behalf. Some of our oil executives are, friends with some of the ministers and the prime minister, and we'll come to an agreement with you. And so in that agreement, it says that. So it says here that Canada's position that the Dakota First Nations do not have Aboriginal rights in Canada, nor do the historical facts give rise to a treaty adhesion claim. Therefore, the only remedy I can recommend to the minister to address the objectives listed in Lakota proposal dated October 17, 2007 is to make a financial offer to assist the First Nations. So what these grievances were are the way the Canadian system is, and it's very similar to the US system, is that they provide funding to the reserves, to the reservations. And then we have, in Canada, it's called an Indian Act. And under that Indian Act, we have elections and we elect the chief, and that the chief is more or less a chief administrative officer as opposed to hereditary or a traditional chief, like most famous one is Sitting Bull, right? So this is what they offered, and this was initially it was supposed to have been just a straight economic development officer. We'll give you we wanted some money so that we could start economic development. Dakota people do not like being dependent on anybody. And we've never been dependent on the government, but we were forced into it over the years, and I'll get into that a little later. So they offered us $60.3 million for 9 the Dakota First Nations. And what they said was that you would take this offer and divide it between the 9. You take 9 divided by 60.3, you get 6.7 million for each community. Now, some of these communities, they have up to 2,500 people. Some have an on-reserve population of 15. So you would make millionaires out of some families there. Other reserves, 6.7 million, they would go through that in a matter of 4 months. So it wasn't fair to begin with. And then in addition to that, they were offering to, this money would buy land, fee simple land. And then they were willing to convert this to reserve status. Now reserve status is, it gives you a tax break for the people that are employed there. And you can get some goods and services that are tax exempt. But when you consider that the reserve population on any reserve anywhere is, you're lucky if you have 80% unemployment. You know, so 2 out of every 10 people, adult people, are working. So this tax exemption doesn't apply to the whole community. It only applies to the select few that are employed or would make use of a tax service like that. So the Dakota people, we don't believe in that. The other thing about a reserve, and this is the main reason why we don't like the system, that in order to accept this agreement, in order for us to get any kind of financial settlement with Canada, Canada will require comprehensive releases from each Dakota First Nation entering into a settled agreement releasing Canada from any future claims by the First Nations for Aboriginal treaty rights identified in Section 35 of the Constitution Act. So initially, they're saying that Canada's position as Dakota First do not have Aboriginal rights. We don't have any rights at all. But here's some money. But if you want this money, you're going to have to surrender your rights, title, and privilege that you never had in the first place, right? So this was unanimously rejected. So then the Dakota communities decided they were going to take Canada to court. And this was filed July 22nd of 2009, a year and a half later. Now, nine of the Dakota communities rejected that initial offer unanimously, right across the board. I was there at that meeting. I'll use the word chief, but the chief that I work with now, he runs his community, his Dakota people, the way it's been run from his dad. His dad passed on his leadership to him, and his grandfather before him, and his dad before him, and his dad before him, and his dad before him for the last 1,000 years. We still run that same form of government that the Dakota people had from day one. Now, I heard a gentleman here talking about the Six Nations Confederacy. It's one of the oldest democracies. Well, we have that. Now, with our community, this, and again, I'm using the word chief or leader, he was forgotten about all these years. Canada forgot about him, and I'll get to that later. So this form of government that he has is not under the Indian Act. He's not an elected leader. In Canada, we have elections every 2 years. You know, in 2 years, somebody like myself would become the chief, right? And in those 2 years, I'm supposed to learn everything about the workings of the government, right? And then by the time I actually learn anything, there's an election, and I'm done. New guy comes in, same thing, 2 years. Every 2 years, we go through this. So Canada's got a good system set up here. So in a year and a half since that 2007, this July of you can see up there, it says the governments and councils of Sioux Valley Dakota Nation, Chinoopoukpa Dakota Nation, and Dakota Plains. Dakota Plains is where I'm working with. I used to live in Sioux Valley. Sioux Valley is the biggest one. Dakota Plains is the smallest. 6.7 million for Dakota Plains. That chief, his family, they'd all be millionaires. And he was the first one that rejected it because it wasn't fair to everybody. And that, in essence, is what the Dakota people are about. So there was only three of the communities left. And so we took Canada to court July 22nd. We received this November 30th of that same year. Now in court, you're allowed 30 days to respond, right? So they asked for an extension for 45 days, which would have took them into September. We didn't get this till the end of December. Now Canada, right from day one, has stated that the Dakota people are refugees in Canada. I am a refugee. My uncle is a refugee. And it's so Canada's statement of defense, and I won't go through it point by point, but they made a concession. They acknowledged that we had a treaty with the British, but they used it in the past tense, had. They say that this treaty expired after the War of 1812 because our treaty with the British was a military, trade, and economic alliance, and it was also based on equality. What we had, they had. What they had, we had. We used the English alphabet, and we used to communicate with each other. We used to write in Dakota, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But so they say we had a treaty, but it was only specifically for military political purposes before the cessation of hostilities between the United States of America and the United Kingdom. So after 1814, there was no more treaty. And then they go on to say that the Royal Proclamation of 1763 did not bind the British Crown or the Crown right in Canada to enter any treaty with the plaintiffs. So this Royal Proclamation of 1763 was an outline of how they were supposed to proceed and how they were supposed to deal with the native tribes in making treaties and operating with them. So that didn't apply to us, Canada says. And then it goes further on, and it says that the plaintiffs, us, were habitually resident in the United States of America and the territory of Minnesota, later the Dakota Territory until 1862, 1865. And we migrated into across the 49th parallel. Then it also says that they deny any allegations in paragraph, denies treaty, fiduciary trusts, contractual moral duty owed by the government of Canada, and it goes on to say that denies any existence of any Aboriginal title rights, entitlement, legal interests. It says denies any negligent or intentional misrepresentation, deception, or breach of trust, or any wrongdoing, says the government of Canada was under no obligation or duty to negotiate or treat or consult with the plaintiff's ancestors. So they never did anything illegal or anything wrong in dealing with the Native people and including the Dakotas. So the Dakotas have been in the court now since July 22nd or July 24th of 2009. Now the following year, we had our first meeting with Canada. And Canada wanted us to put our court case in abeyance, which means we don't kill the court case, but you just put it aside while you try and negotiate. And this is what people have been saying to us all along. Well, why haven't you negotiated with the government? Well, we try and negotiate with the government, but the government comes back with those documents like that. And do we have those letters here? Now, there are some documents that I don't have available up there, but there's two letters here. One is from Tom Siddon, June 25th, 1992. And I'm going to read this. I'll read this paragraph to you. Following the Minnesota-Sioux War of 1862 and the Battle of the Little Bighorn in 1876, both Santee and Teton Sioux crossed the Great Medicine Line, the 49th parallel, the international border, and sought sanctuary in Canada. It is clear from the historical record that this relocation was to escape the retribution of the United States government. The Dakota arriving in Canada did not claim Aboriginal title. Instead, they put great emphasis on a right to be treated fairly as refugees, on the basis of their service to the British Crown during the Revolutionary War and the War of 1812. In support of this, the Dakota displayed medals and gorgets of King George III, which their ancestors had received from a grateful sovereign. Now, this letter is dated June 25th, 1992, and it's from the Minister of Indian Affairs, Tom Sidden. Now, I have a letter here dated January 24th, 1996, and I'll just read a portion of this paragraph. Following the Minnesota-Sioux War of 1862 and the Battle of the Little Bighorn, both the Santee and Teton Sioux crossed the Great Medicine Line, so it's the same paragraph, right? This one is dated January 24th, 1996, and it's from the Minister of Indian Affairs, Ron Irwin. So this is the kind of treatment that we get from the Canadian government. You know, what happened here was the Minister of Indian Affairs comes in, he gets elected to a cabinet position. He becomes the Minister of Indian Affairs, and then he goes back to his office, and there's a question there: what do we do with the Dakotas? So what does he do? Does he go and do his own research to find out what this problem is with the Dakotas? No, he goes to his staff. His staff go to the filing cabinet, pull out the last letter they written on behalf to the Dakota people. They take the letter, make a few changes, change the date and the name. He signs it and he sends it out. And this is what we deal with the Canadian government. So when we were going to take Canada to court, our elders told us that before we can proceed, we need to know what our history is. We need to know what kind of evidence we can put together. I have here a book. This is from 2007. It says, "The Establishment of the Dakota Reserves in Manitoba." This is what Canada calls research. It's all Indian Affairs letters, Indian agents that wrote letters back and forth to Canada, and basically it says that these Dakota people, whichever letter it is, they came across from the United States. So this is what Canada calls research. Now I'm going to show you and Canada does that because they control everything, every aspect of our life with this Indian Act. They control every aspect of it. So when we want research done, and my uncle has been doing this, I said, for 50 years. You know, this is what they ran into with the Canadian government all the time. We want research, we want to hire our own research. Oh no, you don't have to do that. We've got researchers, we'll do our research for you. That's the information we get. So we hired a fellow by the name of James Ritchie. He's from Scottish descent. And I never knew a lot about the Scottish history until I started talking to James. And there's a fellow by the name of William Wallace. They made a movie about him called Braveheart. Now this guy was trying to get solidarity and sovereignty for his people. And they quartered him. And they hung his body parts on the different the borders of the English as a warning to anybody that if they ever tried that again. So when we talk about tragedies and things like that, this has been going on for years. But it's always somebody dominating over somebody else. And so our elders hired this gentleman to help us, and he has an affinity with the Dakota people, which I won't get into, but he has an obligation that he acquired from another Scottish fellow. And in their way of life, when somebody takes an oath to do something, they have to carry it out, or they get somebody to carry it out for them. So James was this fellow, and he was a newspaper reporter. So he's investigative by nature. So these when Canada hires a researcher, the researcher does what Canada tells them to. When we hire a researcher, we hired a fellow that would question what the elder would say. He's not going to believe him just because the elder says okay and he writes it down. He goes into the archives and he tries to find evidence, right? So the elders told him that the Dakota influence extended from the Northwest Territories, which is up here, all the way down to South Carolina down here, down into the Mississippi. And in our language, there's certain words that people have used to name their towns. One of them is Winona. When Winona, properly translated, it's the firstborn daughter. And there's a town here in Santee, in South Carolina, named Santee. Now Santee, of course, is a Dakota word. It means like a knife, right? So I did some little bit of research about this town, and that's what it is. It's from a Dakota word. So when our elders said that our territory extended from here to here, this is where we're from here, in this area here. So we have a good relationship with the Dene people further north, and the Cree and the DeSoto people now. They also say that they have records from their elders that the Dakotas were way up into this part of the territory. And contrary to popular belief, we weren't at war with everybody. Prior to the Europeans coming, we were pretty much lived in harmony. We never had any homeless people, no hungry people. Everybody looked after everybody. And so that was the extent of the territory. And then next, when the British and the French came into this part of the territory here, if you go back to the previous one, we were in and around the Great Lakes area. So the British made a treaty with the Dakotas, and it started with the Hudson's Bay Charter in 1670. The Hudson's Bay Charter is basically all the waters that flowed into Hudson's Bay, Hudson's Bay. So in this part of the territory here, they'd be dealing with the Crees and the Ojibways and the Iroquois and all the other tribes. Over here, they'd be dealing with the Dene people, and then the Cree further north, and then down here, this is all Dakota territory. So they had to make an agreement with the Dakotas in order to have access to all this territory here. So that started in 1670. In 1753, there was what they call a 7 Years' War. I don't know if you're familiar with the province of Quebec, but Quebec used to be a French territory. And now it's a province within Canada, and they still to this day, they do not get along with the English. There are some people that want to break away from Canada and the French to become a sovereign state. So after that 7-year war was over, our treaty was with the British. And again, it's a military, economic, and trade alliance. Prior to this war, the French controlled the St. Lawrence Seaway. So the only way the British could get back from in this area here was through here. So they had to pay taxes to the French. When they made a treaty with us, it was for economic and trade, and we gave them an alternate route down the Mississippi and then back out this way. So after the 7-year war, the British controlled this part of the territory, and they didn't have to use this alternative route. So the next battle that took place was the Revolutionary War. The United States breaks away and it creates its own country. Now the British again call on the Dakotas, and because we have a military trade economic alliance, we go and we fight with the British. Now this is a letter from March 27th, 1780. It says, General Wabush was well contented with his commission, and believe me, his warriors are nothing inferior to regular troops. And I know it says that because it's been transcribed into here. So here's General Wabushaw was well content with his commission, believed his warriors are nothing inferior to regular troops in regard to discipline their own way. So even though Wabushaw was a Dakota, and this word here is not, it's not Wabushaw, it's supposed to be Wahbesha, but you know, it's difficult for a foreigner to repeat this name, so they changed his name to Wabushaw. And first and principal, cared to examine their arms in the morning, drawing their powder, always fresh loaded at sunset. So this is an indication of the treaty that we had. Now, the legal person that we had working with us at this time told us that if you can't find a copy of the treaty, find evidence of treaty behavior, right? So this is evidence of treaty behavior. Now, this year being the 2012, it's also an anniversary for Canada. So what Canada did was they wanted to have a commemoration for all the Indians. And I'll talk about that word Indian later. Now what Canada wanted to do was they wanted to have a commemoration for all the Indians that helped the British during the War of 1812. Now, it is true that the British hired mercenaries. They hired different tribes to fight alongside with them. But what happened in a lot of cases was these tribes, because they're only fighting for money, when the fighting got too intense or it didn't look too good, they would bail out. And this is an example of one of them. So there's an escort with some prisoners and some people, and they were attacked and they were killed. So it says here, a like disaster cannot happen next year. I can venture to assure your excellencies that the 1,000 Sioux, again that's a brigadier general, 1,000 Sioux, 1,000 warriors under him, without any mixture from neighboring tribes, will be in the field in April under Wabushaw if no accident happens to him. His interpreter, Monsieur Rogue, is a thorough, honest man. Both have conceived the necessity for profound secrecy, as well as the design and manner of executing it, in order to avoid the excited reports, the curiosity and suspicion they always excite in traversing such an extent of country. Everything was settled with Wabushaw here, and his wants were supplied. So there's evidence of our treaty. The western boundary of the United States at that time is the Ohio River Valley. And of course, these are the 13 colonies. So you can see there's still pockets of Dakota-speaking people in and around here. You can see that the territory shrunk further north. Now, it wasn't the wars that killed off our people, it was disease. We had never had any of these diseases that were upon us now. We had measles and smallpox and whooping cough and all kinds of stuff. And there's documented evidence, again, with the Jesuit priests in Canada and army documents down here that they purposely infected blankets to decimate our population. So the next slide here, again, now this is in 1812. And the Mississippi River Valley is now the western border of the United States at that time. And so again, because we have a treaty with the British, we were asked to help and fight against the United States. So there's 3 documented battles here: Battle of Detroit, Battle of Prairie du Chien further down here, and Battle of Michilimackinac, which is in and around here. So at these battles, the Dakota showed up with, again with the 1,000 warriors, and they won the battles. And something I wanna make something clear. When we're talking about this, I've done these presentations at universities and at public schools and for people in general, right? We don't want anybody to feel that we're holding you responsible for anything. There's a word in our language, and that word is washichu. Now, a washichu is a greedy person. Our language is descriptive, so we describe if we meet somebody, we describe a character about them. So unfortunately, all the greedy people that our people met back then were white. So eventually, over the years, a Washichu person became to mean a white person, but that's not what that word means. It's a greedy person. And trust me, we have greedy people in our world. There's greedy people all over this world. And that's a lot of the reason why we're in the position that we are. So, this is the Dakota Territory now, and this is at the War of 1812. And I want to show you a couple of letters. These are love letters from my ex-girlfriend. No. So this is Thomas Jefferson. Now, Thomas Jefferson was not the president at the time of the War of 1812, but I wanted to find out because Thomas Jefferson is one of the founding fathers, right? So I wanted to know what his thoughts were about the Native people. Okay, so the War of 1812, he's conferring with his friend and Baron Alexander von Humboldt. This is in the presidential library. You can find them. Okay, so he says, "You know, my friend, the benevolent plan we were pursuing here for the happiness of the Aboriginal inhabitants in our vicinities. We spared nothing to keep them at peace with one another, to teach them agriculture and the rudiments of the most necessary arts, to encourage industry by establishing among them separate property." Now, we don't believe in fences and things of that nature. Everybody is equal, and we looked after each other, and we never had, personal property, separate property. In this way, they would have been enabled to subsist and multiply on a moderate scale of landed possession. They would have mixed their blood with ours and been amalgamated and identified with us within no distant period of time. That's assimilation. On the commencement of our present war, this is the War of 1812, we pressed on them the observance of peace and neutrality, okay? Because we fought with the British during the Revolutionary War, so they didn't want us fighting and helping the British. We pressed on them the observance of peace and neutrality, but the interested and unprincipled policy of England has defeated all our labors for the salvation of these unfortunate people. So up here, we're okay, we're good Indians. Down here, now we're unfortunate people. They have seduced the greater part of the tribes within our neighborhood to take up the hatchet against us, and the cruel massacres they have committed on the women and children of our frontiers, taken by surprise, will oblige us now to pursue them to extermination or to drive them to new seats beyond our reach. Okay, so this is Thomas Jefferson. He has another letter. He has another letter here concerning the Indians. Now, this is in response to a previous letter by our post proceeding, that which brought you a letter of May 21st. So I won't get into all of it, but there's two fellows that lived with the Native people. One was Lafitau, he's a Frenchman, and the other one was Adair. Now he says Adair had his kink. He believed all of the Indians of America to be descended from the Jews. Same laws, usages, rites, ceremonies, same sacrifices, priests, prophets, fast festivals, almost the same religion. They all spoke Hebrew. Now, when you heard my uncle talk, right, he has a lot of in his, and if you listen to somebody from Hebrew, that's the way they talked. Now, it is true that we have the same laws, the same usages, because what's written in the Old Testament is what our laws are. Okay, so that wasn't far-fetched. Now, so he called it a kink, right? And the French explorer, he also, so he says, you ask further if the Indians have any order of priesthood among them, like the Druids, bards, minstrels, right? So this is what Thomas Jefferson, they are persons pretending to have communications with the devil and other evil spirits to foretell future events, bring down rain, find stolen goods, raise the dead, destroy some, heal others by enchantment, lay spells, etc. So there's people that were living amongst our people and had a different, we were people. But the president, along with the government, branded us as devil worshippers. And there's a reason for that. We were demonized for a reason. I'll get to that later. So next we get to 1862. 1862 is when the Minnesota Uprising happened. I don't know if you're familiar with the Minnesota Uprising, but there was what the United States used to do, or what they would do is they would take a piece of property, hundreds of square miles, and they would make a treaty with the Indians in that area. But they would tell the Indians that, look, you live in this area here, it's 5 miles by 10 miles or whatever. You live here, you don't have to hunt, you don't have to fish, you don't have to do anything. We'll look after you. We'll provide you with everything that you need. And for a year and a half, the government would actually do that. They would keep their word and they would do that. But in the meantime, they would settle around them for hundreds of miles. Once everybody was settled, then the government would cut back on the supplies. And then again, this word Washichu, right? The wagon train, I'm just using that as an example, right? The wagon train leaves Washington. On the way there, it goes through different traders, right? So each trader would take something off that wagon till it actually got to the people it was supposed to serve. By that time, there's very little left. So now there's men in this audience here. If your family is hungry, what are you going to do? You're a hunter. You go out, you go back to your original hunting ground. It might be 20 miles away, 30 miles, or 5 miles away. But now you're crossing somebody's property. There's fences up, there's somebody's got a crop in, and all of this. So eventually somebody's going to get shot. Usually it's the non-native person. The government comes in and says, look, Indians, you left the reserve, you violated this treaty, and they bring the army and wipe everybody out. So this is also what happened in 1862 in Minnesota. Now the Dakota people had a reserve. Everything was done. The Civil War was on, and so there was a treaty payment that was supposed to come out, and we're starving. And these are our relatives, right? Our great grandparents. 1862 isn't that long ago. So there's a warehouse there, and there's a fellow by the name of Myrick. He's the trader. He's got a storehouse full of food, like a hockey rink size full of food. And he would not give advances to the Dakotas. And he made a comment that let them eat grass. Now this got out, and people were upset, and just like what I had said before, people started going out, the Dakota people were going off to hunt. And of course something happened, somebody got killed. They came back and they told the leadership at the time, his fellow mayor, Little Crow, he knew, because he'd been out east to Washington, he knew the numbers, he knew the power of the United States, but the warriors there, they would rather fight than, starve. And so they started a war. And this war lasted for a little under 2 months. At the conclusion of the war, we lost 300 of our warriors were sentenced to hang. There's a movie out called Lincoln right now. Lincoln, of course, is famous for the Emancipation Proclamation, where all men are created equal. They freed the slaves. The African Americans were made people. So all men are created equal except Indians. And so at the conclusion of this war, they because there was 300 people that were set to be hanged, they reviewed them and they cut it down to 38. So 38 people were executed. Now I'm going to show you a I'm just going to play you a clip. This is called the Dakota 38. And it's just a clip, but just you'll get a little bit of the story here.